"I know who killed your brother," whispered the dying woman to the sheriff who'd been hunting ghosts for 7 years in Cedar Ridge. Sheriff Tom Brennan thought he knew every shadow, every secret. But some ghosts don't stay buried. What follows is a tale of confession, betrayal, and the night justice came with a cost no man should bear. So lean in and hear the story of the night Cedar Ridge changed forever. The words came like thunder in the quiet room. Tom Brennan had been holding Maggie Sullivan's hand for 3 hours, watching her chest rise and fall like a broken bellows. The old saloon keeper had been dying slow for weeks now, her face gray as winter ash. But her eyes still held fire. "I know who killed your brother," she whispered. Tom's hand went still. The clock on the wall ticked 7 times before he could breathe again. 7 years he had been wearing this badge. 7 years of chasing ghosts through every dusty town from here to the Mexican border. 7 years of waking up with Danny's name on his lips and whiskey on his breath. "What did you say?" His voice came out rough as sandpaper. Maggie's fingers tightened around his. Her voice was nothing more than wind through dry grass. "Danny Brennan, your little brother. I know who put that bullet in his back." The room felt smaller now. The walls pressed him like they were made of lead instead of pine boards. Tom had sat in this same chair beside this same bed when his own mother died 15 years ago. He remembered the smell then, too. Medicine and dying hope mixed together. But this was different. This was the end of searching. "Tell me." The words fell out of him like stones down a well. Maggie's eyes closed. For a moment Tom thought she had slipped away, taking her secret with her. But then she spoke again, each word careful and deliberate as footsteps on thin ice. It was Jonas Mitchell and his boys. They came to the mine that night, looking for something. Danny got in their way. Jonas Mitchell. Tom's blood turned to winter water. Jonas Mitchell, who sat in the front pew every Sunday. Jonas Mitchell, who bought drinks for the whole saloon on his birthday. Jonas Mitchell, who had shaken Tom's hand at Danny's funeral and called him brother. "You're wrong." But even as he said it, Tom knew she wasn't. Something deep in his chest, something that had been twisted tight for 7 years, began to loosen. Not with relief. With a pain so sharp it made him want to double over. "I ain't wrong, Tom Brennan." Maggie's voice was getting fainter, like she was speaking from the bottom of a deep hole. "I was there. I saw what they did to that boy." The clock ticked. Outside, a dog barked once and went quiet. Tom could hear his own heart beating against his ribs like a bird trying to get out of a cage. "Why didn't you tell me before?" His voice broke on the last word. "Because I was scared. Because Jonas Mitchell is a powerful man in this town. Because I didn't want to end up like your brother." Maggie's breath rattled in her chest. "But I'm dying now. Can't hurt a dead woman." Tom stood up so fast the chair fell backward. It hit the wooden floor like a gunshot. He walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The street outside was empty except for a tumbleweed rolling past the bank. 7 years of empty streets. 7 years of questions with no answers. 7 years of looking for Danny's killer in every stranger's face. And all this time, the killer had been right here. Had been buying him coffee and asking about his health and commenting on the weather like they were friends. "Tom." Maggie's voice was barely there now. He turned back to her. Her face looked peaceful, like she had just set down something heavy she had been carrying too long. "There's more. About that night. About why they killed him." She coughed, and Tom saw blood on her lips. There was a little girl at the mine. Danny died protecting her. A little girl. Tom felt the room spin around him like he was drunk. But he hadn't touched a drop today. Hadn't touched a drop in 3 weeks. Not since he had promised himself he would find Danny's killer sober or not at all. What little girl? Martha. Martha Coughlin. Her daddy worked the mine before it closed. She was living there alone after her folks died. Just a baby, really. Maybe 10 years old. Maggie's voice was fading like smoke. Danny found her first. He was bringing her food, keeping her safe. That's why he was there that night. Martha Coughlin. Tom had never heard the name before, but Danny would have done that. Danny who used to bring home every stray cat and wounded bird he found. Danny who gave away his lunch money to kids whose fathers drank up their wages. Danny, who died protecting a child Tom never knew existed. Where is she now? Tom asked, but he was talking to empty air. Maggie Sullivan was gone, her hands still warm in his, but her eyes staring at something he couldn't see. Tom closed her eyes gently. Then he picked up his hat from the bedside table and walked outside into the dying light. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything the color of dried blood. 7 years of sunsets. 7 years of wondering if he would ever know the truth. Now he knew, and the knowing felt worse than the not knowing had ever been. He walked slowly down Main Street, his spurs ringing against the wooden boardwalk. People nodded at him as he passed. Mrs. Henderson sweeping her front steps. Old Pete loading supplies into his wagon. Jonas Mitchell coming out of the bank, counting money. Jonas looked up and smiled. Evening, Sheriff. How's Maggie doing? Tom stopped walking. He looked at Jonas Mitchell's face, the same face that had looked down at Danny's coffin with false sorrow. The same hands that had maybe pulled the trigger. The same mouth that had spoken lies at the funeral about what a good boy Danny had been. She's dead, Tom said. Jonas's face changed. I'm sorry to hear that. She was a good woman. Yes, Tom said quietly. She was. They stood there in the fading light, the killer and the brother of the dead boy, making small talk about the weather and the price of cattle. Tom felt like he was watching it happen to someone else, like he was floating above the street, looking down at two men who didn't know that everything had just changed. Well, Jonas said finally, I should get home to Martha. She worries when I'm late. Martha. The name hit Tom like a fist to the stomach, but he kept his face still as stone. Martha, he asked, careful to keep his voice level. My niece. Been living with me since her folks died. Sweet little thing, but skittish as a spooked horse. Jonas smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. You know how it is with orphans. They never quite trust anyone again. Tom nodded like he understood. Like his whole world hadn't just turned upside down. Like he hadn't just learned that his brother's killer was raising the child Danny had died to protect. Give her my regards, Tom said. I will. Jonas tipped his hat and walked away, whistling a tune Tom recognized from church. Something about amazing grace and how sweet the sound. Tom stood in the street until the stars came out. Then he walked back to his office and sat down at his desk. He opened the bottom drawer and took out the bottle of whiskey he kept there for emergencies. This felt like an emergency. This felt like the end of the world. But instead of drinking, he just held the bottle and thought about Danny. About a 10-year-old boy who had cared more about protecting a scared little girl than he had about his own life. About 7 years of looking for monsters in all the wrong places. The truth was a heavy thing. Heavier than the badge on his chest. Heavier than the gun on his hip. Heavy as 7 winters of grief and guilt and whiskey-soaked dreams. Tomorrow he would have to decide what to do with it. Tonight, he would just sit with it and let it settle into his bones like the cold. The sun was barely a promise on the horizon when Tom saddled his horse and rode out of town. He had not slept, had not eaten, had only sat in his office chair all night, turning Maggie's words over in his mind like stones in his pocket. Now the truth pulled him toward the old mining camp like iron to a magnet. The ride took 3 hours through country that grew wilder with each mile. Sagebrush and scrub oak gave way to rocky hills dotted with twisted pines. The trail was barely there anymore, just little ruts grown over with weeds and filled with 7 years of dust. No one came out here now. No reason to. The silver had run out long before Danny died. Tom's horse, a steady brown mare named Belle, picked her way carefully over loose stones and around fallen logs. She seemed to sense his mood and kept her ears forward, alert for trouble. Tom was grateful for her company. The silence out here was the kind that made a man hear things that weren't there. Or maybe things that were. When the camp came into view around a bend in the trail, Tom pulled Belle to a stop. He had been here only once since Danny's death. The sheriff before him, old Pete Murphy, had brought him out to see where it happened. Tom remembered standing in the mud and snow that February day, looking at the dark stain on the ground that might have been his brother's blood or might have been nothing at all. Now the place looked different, smaller somehow. Time had worn it down to just the bones of what it used to be. A few wooden buildings leaning against each other like tired old men. The mine shaft opening like a black mouth in the hillside. Rusted equipment scattered around like the remains of some great metal animal. But something was wrong. Tom could feel it before he could see it. Smoke was rising from the chimney of what used to be the foreman's house. Someone was living here. Tom dismounted and tied Belle to a post that still stood straight. His boots made no sound on the soft earth as he walked toward the house. The door was open a crack, and he could smell something cooking inside. Beans and salt pork. The smell made his empty stomach growl. "Hello," he called out, his hand resting easy on his gun. Not threatening, but ready. The cooking sound stopped. Then a voice came from inside, thin and scared as a bird's whistle. "Go away." It was a child's voice. A girl's voice. "I'm not here to hurt you," Tom said, taking his hand away from his gun completely. "I'm Sheriff Brennan from town. I just want to talk." "I don't want to talk to no sheriff." Tom heard her moving around inside, probably looking for a back way out. He sat down on the front steps to show he wasn't going to chase her. The wood was weathered gray and soft with age. 7 years of rain and snow and sun had worn it smooth. "What's your name?" he asked. Silence. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. "Martha." Tom's heart did something strange in his chest, like it forgot how to beat for a moment, then remembered too fast. "Martha Coughlin?" More silence. Then the door creaked open a little wider. Tom could see part of a face peering out. Brown eyes set in a face that was too thin, too serious for a child. Hair the color of wheat that needed cutting. A dress that had been mended so many times it looked more like patches than cloth. "How do you know my name?" "I knew your friend Danny," Tom said. The words came out harder than he meant them to. "Danny Brennan. He used to bring you food." The door opened all the way. Martha stepped out, and Tom saw that she was smaller than he had imagined. Skinny as a fence post, and just as tough-looking. She carried herself like someone who had learned early that the world was not a safe place. "You're his brother," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "You got his eyes. Same green color. Same way of looking at things like you're trying to see inside them." Martha sat down on the steps beside him, careful to keep some distance. "He talked about you sometimes. Said you were going to be a lawman like your daddy was." Tom had forgotten that Danny knew about their father. Had forgotten that Danny remembered the stories their mother used to tell about the man who died when they were both too young to remember him clearly. "Danny told you about our father?" "He told me lots of things. About when you were boys. About the time you saved him from drowning in Miller's Creek. About how you taught him to read when Mama was too tired." Martha's voice got quieter. "He said you were the best brother a person could have." The words hit Tom like stones. He had to look away, out toward the mine shaft where his brother had died. "I wasn't good enough," he said. "I didn't keep him safe." "That wasn't your job," Martha said. "That was his choice. He chose to keep me safe instead." They sat together in the morning sun, the man who had spent 7 years blaming himself and the child who had lived 7 years with the weight of being saved. Tom could hear Belle snorting and stamping behind them, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk crying. "Tell me what happened that night," Tom said finally. Martha was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was flat as still water. "I was sleeping in the mine. Stayed there when it was cold because it was warmer inside the mountain. Danny had brought me a blanket the day before. A real wool one, not just old sacks sewn together." Tom closed his eyes. Danny had given away his own blanket. Tom was sure of it. "I heard horses coming fast. Danny heard them too. He came running from town, must have seen them heading this way. He told me to hide deep in a mine shaft and not come out no matter what I heard. But you didn't stay hidden. I was scared. I crept back to where I could see. There were 4 men. The one in front, he was real angry about something. Kept yelling about money and how Danny's daddy had cheated him. Our daddy never cheated anyone, Tom said, his voice hard. Danny said the same thing. Said his daddy was an honest man, and these men were liars. Martha picked up a stick and started drawing patterns in the dirt. That made the angry man madder. He got down off his horse and pulled out his gun. Tom felt his hands clench into fists. What did Danny do? He didn't run. He should have run, but he didn't. He just stood there and said they could shoot him if they wanted, but they weren't going to hurt me. Martha's voice got smaller. The man laughed. Said Danny was just like his daddy, too stupid to know when he was beat. And then he shot Danny in the back when Danny turned around to tell me to run deeper into the mine. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Tom could see it happening as clear as if he had been there. Danny, 19 years old and brave as a lion, standing between death and a frightened child. "I'm sorry," Martha said. "I'm sorry he died because of me." Tom turned to look at her. Really look at her. This small, fierce girl who had been carrying guilt that belonged to him, who had been living alone in a dead place for 7 years, probably believing she was the reason a good man was gone. "It wasn't because of you," he said. "It was because of him. And it was because Danny was the kind of person who couldn't walk away when someone needed help." "Like you," Martha said. "No, not like me. I've been walking away for 7 years. Martha stood up and brushed the dirt off her dress. "You want some coffee? I got some on the stove. It ain't very good coffee, but it's hot." Tom nodded. He followed her into the little house and saw how she had made it into a home. Clothes hanging on a line strung across one corner. A few books stacked on an old crate that served as a table. A bed made from old mine timbers and covered with quilts that looked hand-sewn. "You made this?" he asked, touching one of the quilts. "Danny's mama taught me before she died. Said every girl should know how to make something beautiful." Martha poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to him. "I ain't got no sugar. This is fine." Tom sipped the coffee. It was terrible, but it was warm and strong. "Martha, I need to ask you something important. The man who shot Danny, do you remember what he looked like?" Martha's face went pale. She set down her cup with shaking hands. "I remember everything about him. I see his face every night when I close my eyes." She looked out the window toward town. He had gray in his hair and a scar on his left hand. He wore a ring with a red stone in it, and he smelled like tobacco and leather. Jonas Mitchell. Every detail fit. "Martha," Tom said carefully, "that man, he's been looking for you. He's been telling people you're his niece, that you live with him in town." The cup slipped from Martha's fingers and shattered on the floor. Coffee spread across the boards like spilled blood. "He knows where I am." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't think so. I think he's been lying about having you, maybe to keep people from asking questions about what happened to you." Tom knelt and started picking up the pieces of the cup. "But Martha, you can't stay here alone anymore. It's not safe. I've been safe here for 7 years. That was before I started asking questions. Before people started talking about Danny again." Tom stood up with his hands full of broken pottery. "They'll come looking. And next time, there won't be a Danny to protect you." Martha wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold. "Where would I go? I got nowhere else." Tom looked around the little house she had made from nothing, at the quilts and the books and the small, careful life she had built in this place of death. He thought about his empty house in town, about 7 years of eating alone and sleeping alone and waking up to silence. "You could come with me," he said. The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. "I got a house in town. It's got 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen. You could go to school, have friends." "What about him? What about the man who killed Danny?" Tom met her eyes. In them he saw fear, but also something else. Something that looked like hope, small and fragile as a candle flame. "Let me worry about him," Tom said. "That's what sheriffs are for." Martha was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at the mine where her friend had died protecting her. Finally she nodded. "I'll need to pack my things. Take your time." As she gathered her few possessions, Tom stood in the doorway and watched the sun climb higher over the mountains. Somewhere in town, Jonas Mitchell was probably eating breakfast with his wife, getting ready for another day of pretending to be an honest man. But his time was running out. Tom could feel it in the wind that blew down from the high peaks, carrying the scent of snow and change. The truth was coming for Jonas Mitchell. And this time, Tom wouldn't be facing it alone. They made camp halfway back to town, where a stand of cottonwoods grew beside a small creek. Tom had wanted to push through to get Martha somewhere safe before dark. But she had grown quiet as they rode, her small hands gripping the saddle horn like she was holding on to the edge of the world. When she started swaying in the saddle, he knew she needed rest. The fire crackled between them as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Tom had caught 2 fish from the creek, and they ate them with the last of Martha's beans and some hardtack from his saddlebags. It was the first real meal either of them had eaten in days. Martha sat cross-legged on her blanket, staring into the flames. The firelight painted her thin face in shades of gold and shadow. She looked older than her years, the way children did when life had asked too much of them too soon. "You ever wonder what makes a person bad?" she asked suddenly. Tom looked up from cleaning his plate with creek water. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about a lot. About the men who killed Danny. Were they born bad, or did something make them that way?" It was a question Tom had wrestled with for 7 years. In his darker moments, usually when the whiskey made him philosophical, he had wondered the same thing. Whether evil was something that grew in a man like a cancer, or something he chose fresh every morning when he woke up. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe it don't matter. Maybe what matters is what they do, not why they do it." Martha nodded slowly. She picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the dark sky. "That night," she said, "I didn't tell you everything." Tom set down his plate. "What did you leave out?" "The things they said. The real reason they came." Martha's voice got smaller. "And what happened after?" Tom waited. He had learned in his years wearing a badge that silence was sometimes the best way to get people to tell the truth. Martha needed to tell this story in her own time, in her own way. "They didn't come looking for me," Martha said finally. "They came looking for something my daddy hid before he died. Something valuable." "What kind of something?" "Money. A lot of money. Daddy worked as the mine foreman for 3 years before the silver ran out. But he found out the owner was cheating the workers, keeping 2 sets of books, paying men half what they earned and pocketing the rest." Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Your daddy tried to stop it?" "He tried to report it to the territorial authorities. But the owner had friends in high places. Friends who made sure Daddy's letters never got where they were supposed to go." Martha's hand shook as she continued poking the fire. "So Daddy did something else. He started taking money from the owner's safe. Not all of it, just enough to pay the workers what they were owed. He was stealing it back. That's what he called it. Stealing it back. He kept careful records of every penny, planning to turn it all over to the law when he had enough proof to make them listen." Martha looked up at Tom, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "But he got sick before he could. Died of the lung fever that winter. Told me where he hid the money. Made me promise to give it to an honest lawman someday." Tom felt the pieces falling into place like dominoes. "And Jonas Mitchell found out about the money." "Not Jonas. At least, not at first. It was the mine owner who came looking. A man named Garrett Webb. Rich man from back east who owned half the territory." Martha's voice got hard. But Webb was smart. He didn't come himself that first time. He sent other men. Jonas was one of them. Jonas and 3 others. They'd been asking around town about Daddy, about what he might have hidden. Someone must have told them I was still living at the mine. Martha threw her stick into the fire and watched it burn. They came on a Tuesday night in February. Snow was falling so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. Tom remembered that night. He had been in a saloon in town, drinking away his wages and feeling sorry for himself because a girl named Sarah had turned down his proposal. While he was drowning his small sorrows in whiskey, his brother was facing death in the snow. Danny had been coming out to check on me every few days since Daddy died, bringing food, making sure I had enough wood for the fire. He was the only one who knew I was still there. Martha hugged her knees to her chest. That night, he must have seen them coming. Must have run all the way from town to warn me. But he was too late. No, he was just in time. They had already started searching the buildings when he got there. Danny found me in the mine shaft and told me to hide deeper, like I said. But then he went back outside to face them. Tom closed his eyes. He could see it happening. Danny, 19 and fearless, walking out into the snow to face 4 armed men. What did they want from him? They thought he knew where Daddy hid the money. They kept asking him questions, getting madder when he said he didn't know nothing about it. Martha's voice broke slightly. Jonas was the worst. He kept calling Danny names, saying he was lying to protect me. Said the Brennan family was all liars and thieves. Tom's hands clenched into fists. Danny never lied about anything in his life. That's what he told them, over and over. But they didn't believe him. Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Finally, Jonas got so mad he pulled out his gun. Said if Danny wouldn't tell them where the money was, maybe I would. And that's when Danny stepped between them. He moved so fast I almost didn't see it. Put himself right in front of the mine entrance and said they'd have to go through him to get to me. Martha looked at Tom across the fire. Your brother was the bravest person I ever knew, even braver than Daddy. Tom had to look away. The firelight was making his eyes water, or maybe it was something else. Jonas shot him, not right away. First they tried to scare him, waved their guns around, made threats. But Danny just stood there, never moved, never backed down. Martha's voice got stronger, like telling this part gave her strength. Finally, Jonas said they were wasting time. Said there were other ways to make people talk. What did he mean? He meant me. He meant they'd hurt me to make Danny tell them what they wanted to know. Martha stared into the fire, but Danny still wouldn't move. Even when they started walking toward the mine, even when Jonas put the gun right against his head, Tom felt sick. How did it end? Danny made them an offer. Said he'd take them to where he thought the money might be, but only if they left me alone. Completely alone. Martha's voice was barely above a whisper now. Jonas laughed. Said Danny was in no position to make deals. And then she stopped talking. The only sounds were the fire crackling and the creek running over stones in the darkness. And then Tom prompted gently. Danny turned around to look at me one last time. I could see his face in the moonlight. He wasn't scared. He looked— Martha searched for the word. He looked peaceful, like he'd made his peace with whatever was about to happen. That's when Jonas shot him, in the back, like a coward, while Danny wasn't even looking at him. Anger flashed in Martha's eyes. Then they spent the rest of the night tearing the place apart, looking for Daddy's money. But they never found it, because you knew where it was. Martha nodded. Daddy had hidden it good, somewhere they'd never think to look. She met Tom's eyes across the fire. It's still there, all of it, waiting for that honest lawman Daddy wanted me to find. Tom felt the weight of the badge on his chest like it was made of lead. 7 years he had worn it. 7 years of trying to be the kind of man his father had been, the kind of man Danny had believed he could be. But had he been honest? Had he really? Martha, he said carefully, what you're telling me, it means Jonas Mitchell and his friends aren't just murderers. They're thieves too. And if Garrett Webb was behind it all, you can't arrest them, Martha said quietly. I know you want to, but you can't. Webb's too powerful, and Jonas has too many friends. It would be your word against theirs. And who's going to believe an orphan girl and a sheriff who's been chasing shadows for 7 years? Tom knew she was right. The law was supposed to be blind, but it wasn't deaf. Money talked louder than justice in this territory, and Garrett Webb had more money than most small countries. So what do you want me to do? He asked. Just let them get away with it. I want you to do what Danny would have done. I want you to protect the innocent and stop the guilty, even if it means breaking rules that were made to protect the wrong people. Martha reached in her dress and pulled out a small leather pouch. She held it out to Tom across the fire. What's that? Part of the money Daddy took. The part that was meant for the workers who died before they could collect their wages. Martha's eyes were steady on his. Their families are still alive, still struggling, still wondering why their fathers died poor when they should have died paid. Tom took the pouch. It was heavier than he expected. Inside, he could feel the weight of gold coins. There's more where that came from, Martha said. Enough to make sure those families are taken care of. Enough to buy some justice, even if we can't get it from courtroom. Tom looked at the girl across the fire. This small, fierce child who had survived 7 years alone, who had watched his brother die protecting her, who was now offering him a choice between the law he served and the justice Danny had died for. What about Webb and Jonas? What about making them pay? Martha smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like the child she should have been. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. Making sure the people they hurt are taken care of. Making sure Danny's sacrifice meant something. Tom hefted the pouch in his hand. Inside those leather walls was enough gold to change lives, to heal wounds, to honor the dead by helping the living. He thought about his badge, about the oath he had sworn, about the difference between law and justice. They weren't always the same thing. Maybe they weren't even supposed to be. "All right," he said finally. "But first, we make sure you're safe. Really safe. Somewhere Jonas Mitchell can never find you." Martha nodded. And then Tom looked into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker like the ghosts of all the choices he had made and all the ones he was about to make. "Then we start making things right." The fire burned lower between them, but neither moved to add more wood. Some conversations needed the darkness to make them complete. Some truths could only be spoken when the light was dying and the shadows were deep enough to hide in. Tomorrow they would ride into town and everything would change. But tonight, they sat beside the fire and planned how to honor the dead by saving the living. They reached town as the church bells rang for morning service. The streets were quiet except for a few early risers heading to worship and the sound of horses being led to water. Tom felt Martha's small hand tighten on his arm as they rode down Main Street past the bank, past the saloon, past all the places where Jonas Mitchell had walked free for 7 years while Danny lay cold in the ground. "You sure about this?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom looked down at her, riding beside him on the gentle mare he'd borrowed from the livery. She had braided her wheat-colored hair that morning and put on her cleanest dress. She looked like any other child heading to Sunday service, except for the way her eyes watched every shadow, every doorway. "I'm sure," he said, though his heart was beating like a drum in his chest. They stopped in front of Tom's house, a simple 2-story building with a front porch and windows that had been dark too long. Tom helped Martha down from her horse and tied both animals to the hitching post. The morning air smelled of wood smoke and coffee, normal Sunday smells that felt strange on a day when everything was about to change. "Wait here," he told Martha. "No." Her voice was small but firm. "If you're going to face them, I should be there too. Danny died protecting me. I should see this through." Tom knelt down, so he was eye level with her. "This isn't your fight anymore, Martha. It's mine. It's been my fight for 7 years." She looked at him with those serious brown eyes. "Besides, you might need someone to make sure you don't do something stupid." Despite everything, Tom almost smiled. "Like what?" "Like shooting them before they can confess. Like letting anger make your choices instead of your head." Martha touched the badge on his chest. "Danny always said the hardest part about being good isn't knowing what's right. It's doing what's right when you want to do what's wrong." Tom stood up slowly. She was right, and they both knew it. This wasn't just about justice for Danny anymore. It was about what kind of man Tom was going to be when the sun set today. What kind of sheriff? What kind of brother to Danny's memory? They walked together to the church at the end of Main Street. The building was whitewashed wood with a simple cross above the door and windows made of colored glass that caught the morning light like jewels. Tom could hear voices inside, singing a hymn he remembered from childhood. Something about Amazing Grace. Jonas Mitchell's buggy was tied up outside next to several others. Tom recognized the horses, Doc Peterson's bay mare, the banker's matched grays, Mayor Collins's sorrel gelding. All the respectable people of the town, gathering to worship and ask forgiveness for their sins while one among them carried the blood of an innocent boy on his hands. "How do you want to do this?" Martha asked. Tom looked at the church, then at the jail across the street, then at the leather pouch in his pocket that held enough gold to change everything for the families Danny had died trying to protect. "Not with guns," he said finally. Danny wouldn't want that. They waited until the service ended. Waited while people filed out in their Sunday best, shaking hands with Pastor Williams and commenting on his sermon about the prodigal son. Tom and Martha stood in the shadow of the general store across the street, watching as Jonas Mitchell emerged with his wife on his arm. Jonas looked prosperous and content, like a man with a clear conscience. His hair was silver at the temples now, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. His wife was a small, nervous woman who rarely spoke above a whisper and always seemed to be apologizing for something. Tom stepped out of the shadows. "Jonas," he called. Jonas turned, his face lighting up with what looked like genuine pleasure. "Tom, good to see you. We missed you at service this morning." "I was busy," Tom said, walking slowly across the street. Martha stayed close beside him, her hand brushing against his arm. "This must be your niece," Jonas said, smiling at Martha. "You're even prettier than your uncle said you were, child." Martha didn't smile back. She stared at Jonas with the steady gaze of someone who had seen him for what he really was. "She's not my niece," Tom said quietly. Something flickered in Jonas's eyes. "Oh, I thought you said." "I never said anything about having a niece." "You did." Tom stopped 3 feet away from Jonas, close enough to see the sweat that had started to bead on the older man's forehead despite the cool morning air. "This is Martha Coughlin. I believe you two have met before." The color drained from Jonas's face like water from a broken bucket. His wife looked confused, glancing back and forth between her husband and the child beside Tom. I'm not sure what you mean," Jonas stammered. "February night, 7 years ago. You and 3 other men rode out to the old mining camp. You were looking for something that belonged to Martha's father." Tom's voice was steady, but Martha could feel the anger in him like heat from a forge. "You found my brother instead." Jonas's hand moved toward his coat, but Tom was faster. His own hand rested easy on his gun, not threatening but ready. "I wouldn't," Tom said. "Not here. Not with your wife watching. Not with half the town as witnesses." Jonas let his hand drop. "Tom, whatever you think you know, I know you murdered Danny Brennan. Shot him in the back while he was protecting a child." Tom's voice carried clearly in the morning air. People had stopped walking, stopped talking. A circle was forming around them, drawn by the tension that crackled like electricity before a storm. "You're wrong," Jonas said, but his voice shook. "You're drunk again, Tom. Making up stories." "Am I?" Tom pulled the leather pouch from his pocket. "Then you won't mind explaining why you were looking for this." Jonas's eyes fixed on the pouch like it was a snake ready to strike. "I don't know what that is. It's part of the money you kill my brother for. The money Martha's father took to pay workers their rightful wages. The money you never found because you were too busy murdering innocent boys." Jonas's wife put her hand to her throat. "Jonas? What is he talking about?" "He's talking about the night your husband became a killer," Martha said, her young voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "The night he shot Danny Brennan for trying to protect me." Mayor Collins pushed through the crowd. "Now see here, Tom. These are serious accusations. You can't just. I can prove every word." Tom looked around at the faces watching him. Some friendly, some concerned, some already hardening with doubt. Martha was there. She saw it all. The word of a child against a respected member of the community? Mayor Collins shook his head. "Tom, you're letting grief cloud your judgment." "Maybe." Tom opened the pouch and let gold coins spill into his palm. They caught the sunlight like drops of fire. But gold doesn't lie. And this gold came from Garrett Webb's mine. Gold that was stolen from the men who died digging it out of the ground. Jonas took a step backward. "You can't prove any of this." "I don't have to prove it in court." Tom closed his hand around the coins. "I just have to make sure the right people get what's coming to them." He looked around at the crowd, at faces he had known all his life. Some of these people had mourned Danny's death. Some had helped search for his killer. All of them deserved to know the truth. "Jonas Mitchell killed my brother," Tom said, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathering. "Him and 3 other men, working for Garrett Webb. They came looking for money that didn't belong to them, and when Danny got in their way, they shot him down like a dog." "You have no proof," Jonas said again, but his voice was hollow now. "I have Martha. I have the gold. And I have something else." Tom reached into his other pocket and pulled out a folded paper. A letter Martha's father wrote before he died. Names, dates, amounts. Everything he took from Webb's safe and why he took it. Jonas looked at the paper like it was his death warrant, which in a way it was. "Even if that's true," Mayor Collins said, "it doesn't give you the right to take the law into your own hands." "You're right," Tom said. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in his pocket. "The law should handle this. I'll send word to the territorial marshal. Let him sort it out." Relief flickered across Jonas's face. A territorial investigation could take months, maybe years, and Garrett Webb had friends in high places. But Tom wasn't finished. Of course, while we're waiting for the marshal, I'll be making sure this gold gets to the families it belongs to. The widows and orphans of the men Webb cheated. Seems like the right thing to do. Tom turned to face the crowd fully. Some of you knew those men. Worked beside them. Watched them die of the lung fever and cave-ins and accidents that happen when safety costs too much money. Their families have been struggling ever since, wondering why their husbands and fathers died poor when they should have died paid. Yell up the pouch. Well, now they'll know. And now they'll get what's rightfully theirs. Jonas stepped forward, desperation making him bold. You can't do that. That money is evidence. It belongs to the court now. What court? Martha spoke up, her young voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The same court that ignored my daddy's letters? The same court that lets rich men buy their way out of trouble while poor men die for telling the truth. Tom looked down at her, and something passed between them. An understanding. A shared knowledge of how the world really worked, and how sometimes doing right meant working outside the law instead of within it. I'm not taking the law into my own hands, Tom said. I'm just making sure justice gets done, one way or another. He turned back to Jonas. You want to stop me? Arrest me. Explain to everyone why you're so interested in keeping this money away from the families it belongs to. Jonas opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around at the faces watching him, saw the suspicion growing in their eyes, the questions forming in their minds. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is. Tom's voice was quiet but final. You kill my brother, Jonas. That's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. But I won't let you profit from it. And I won't let the people Danny died protecting go without justice. Jonas turned and pushed through the crowd, his wife hurrying after him. Tom watched them go, feeling something heavy lift from his chest for the first time in 7 years. What happens now? Martha asked. Tom looked down at her, this small, fierce girl who had survived alone for 7 years and was now standing beside him in the morning sun, free at last from the shadows of the past. Now we go home, he said. We have breakfast. We figure out how to get this gold to the people who need it. And then we start living instead of just surviving. Martha slipped her hand into his. Together, Tom squeezed her fingers gently. Together, they walked back toward Tom's house, leaving the crowd to talk and whisper and wonder. Behind them, the church bell rang once more, calling the faithful to remember that every morning was a chance to begin again. For the first time in 7 years, Sheriff Tom Brennan was ready to answer that call. Not as the man who had failed to save his brother, but as the man Danny had always believed he could be. A man who chose mercy over vengeance, justice over law, and love over loneliness. The ghosts were finally quiet. The hunt was finally over. And in the morning light, 2 broken people had found a way to make each other whole.